Hi everyone, it's been a while, but welcome and happy April. Today is Battery Talks Q1 2023 episode of The Current, and we got some big news for you. One, new high dollar SPACs. Two, we got an alliance going on in the Lithium Triangle. Three, RIP British Volt. And four, new battery guidelines for shipping. It's kind of about time because things are getting a little in fuego out there.
Then we will be going over some continuing macro trends with OEMs and Tier 1 battery makers switching from NMC to LFP and other chemistries. Next, Europe starts trying to fight back against the IRA. Good luck. After that, we cover some of our previous Who's Doing It Right customers, which we especially need to do when we think they're doing it wrong. And then, what always comes last in every battery conversation, what is it, Jeff?
Recycling.
Yes. Um, let's get to it.
All right, first and foremost, everyone, Saku is going SPAC. Honestly, good for them. But what this really means is one, they need capital, and two, probably their early investors want returns on their investment finally. So what they're really planning to do is license out their technology to tier one battery suppliers, or at least that is the hope. But really, to do that, they're going to have to be able to show what we call PPM, or parts per minute, and then they're also going to have to show reliability and performance. So kind of my hot take on this is, unless you got cash to burn, I would stay away with a 10-foot pole. And the reality is that right now Panasonic is at 600 ppm on their current lines, and with tier ones having such thin margins as is, unless Saku can show that not only can they dramatically increase the performance, but they can slot directly in to the existing battery technology and manufacturing, there's no hope. And that's an unfortunate reality, because for them to prove out a technology, they're also going to have to get the cathodes, get the anodes made, and everything else, which is its own endeavor at 1,000 plus cycles. But, having said all of that, let's see what the future holds for them.
All right, so next up, Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, and Brazil plan to coordinate on exploiting their lithium reserves to improve the battery supply chain in South America. I think that's really interesting. I'm really excited to see how that goes. It's called the Lithium Triangle for a reason, and they have a lot of lithium, roughly 53 megatons, which is about 50% of global lithium resources. So, my first thought reading these articles in the last quarter was OPEC 2.0, anyone? Maybe OLEC? But yeah, interesting to see how this is going to go.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if a few countries on that graph haven't already reached out to these respective countries to try and get their feet in the door first, so to speak. I would assume China has already made contact with quite a large amount of enthusiasm, considering they just also recently handed 10 billion out to buy lithium reserves elsewhere. All right, now that we're done with lithium in people's greedy hands, let's get to the big RIP in the room. British Volt is dead, and they are currently being sold for parts to anybody who needs to start building a big factory. So I'm looking at any medium-sized startup trying to get their grubby little hands at auction all over anything they can find. British Volt basically failed for a multitude of reasons. One being just trying to secure funding for their gigafactory. I kind of want to reiterate this, and Aubert and I talk about this all the time. If you're planning about $1 billion to build a gigafactory in total capex, you're probably going to spend about 1 to 2 times that in scrap, trying to get your yields up from absolutely zero to like 70% probably. The second thing is there's this thing called the IRA that came out, and everybody's viewpoints shifted elsewhere geographically. And that hurt where people were starting to build vehicle factories. And then the final thing is it was an unknown quantity, and this is something we'll cover with Northvolt later. But if you're an automotive OEM or somebody who buys batteries, unless you are a small company who isn't big enough to get large allocations from a tier one battery supplier, an EV which can get those allocations is going to want to do it from a known quantity versus a company that just started producing cells. And 1,000 cycles, guys, is a year of testing. I mean, it's 5 years, right? So suddenly this company needs money to live 5 years to prove out that they can make batteries as good as the batteries being made today, or worse, honestly speaking, because they're not going to be anywhere close to like an LG or a Panasonic battery out of the gate.
Yeah, so it's sad to see them go, and brings us back to one of our first videos where Jeff and I did an autopsy on Oxus Energy, which was similar to geographic location. But hopefully some other UK-based battery companies sort of do better going forward.
And Aubert's not implying that everything dies in Britain if it's related to batteries. Just clearing the air. We love the UK.
Just those two. All right, next on the docket, shipping guidelines for batteries are being updated. So we've talked this a couple times before, and just how horrific a couple of the other battery safety incidences have been. I think the two worst ones were the two different shipping containers, which you see pictures of here. But basically, some big news this quarter, particularly in March, where the guidelines, especially for sea containers, are being updated. Basically just to try to prevent these types of fires in the future because they're extremely expensive, damaging, and polluting. So they're looking at a lot of things. One, they're trying to get manufacturers to be safer with their cells, which everyone wants to do. Good luck. More ventilation and suppression systems in the containers and on the ships, which is going to add a lot of cost and additional complexity and probably insurance issues, honestly, as we see this go forward. And then just calls for updating industry standards, better training, better screening and inspections for the different types of shipping. And then, as Jeff and I predicted, specifically Jeff pontificated in our 2023 predictions, new firefighting techniques also needed, just because traditional ones don't do much to lithium-ion, lithium metal fires.
Yeah, and this is going to loop in nicely later for our recycling section, because let's be real, we all know what regulations means. More money.
Yeah, penalties or subsidies, basically. But anyway, I'm excited to see some movement here. The guidelines for shipping batteries also by ground and by air have been constantly changing, and as somebody that does that on a weekly basis, it is a struggle to keep up with the regulations. But also, we see a lot of the shipments catch fire and have problems, and people receiving them burn down factories. And I've literally heard people that have put forklift tines through battery packs in pallets. And so, we definitely need better training. We definitely need better safety. And I'm really excited to kind of see a little bit more structural organization in that direction.
Speaking of people trying to make things safer or perceived safer, Aubert and I still stand on our 75 kilowatt hours of juice under your ass still leads to very big explosions versus 100 kilowatt hours. But, OEMs are starting to move to a relatively, let's say, safer technology in LFP.
Yeah, so announcement from Tesla in Q1 of this year so far, about half of the cars they've shipped have been LFP batteries, which is very interesting. In addition, you see JAC, which is a Chinese automaker, also announcing more use for LFP batteries as well. People are still scrambling over the supply chains, and the costs are definitely not lower, but it's definitely continuing the big shift of some of the big automakers following the cell makers. Speaking of,
before we switch even into that, one thing I want to do is just give the hot take. I think the reason Tesla's going all LFP and you're seeing a lot of these Chinese automakers go sodium ion for shorter range is because let's be honest with ourselves. The people who can afford Teslas, that market is starting to get saturated, right? So now they need to start tapping into the 20 to 30K market. And I don't think they have a clear line of sight of that. Even LFP with the current supply chains is basically the cost of NMC still. So I think they're trying to gear for the future, but yeah, I think at this point they need to figure out how to make things like Toyota Camry or Corolla levels circa 2018.
And then moving to the tier ones and Gelion, because I needed to put them on the same page. So first you see CATL disclosed in August last year that was working towards M3P technology, but a lot of articles about that this year about how they're going to roll those out. I really liked the SK demonstration at the trade show where their new motto is SK on, it's time to move on, and basically just talking about how they're switching to LFP and cobalt free instead of NMC. So I thought it was kind of a funny logo. I don't know, it tickled me in the right spots. So, and then two things that will tickle Jeff in the wrong spot. So LG is developing lithium sulfur batteries. offer twice the range instead of solid state cells. So instead of going down the solid state train like some of the other companies, they're going straight to lithium sulfur and going for Jeff's jugular. And then in addition, and he should be super worried about this one, Gelion has revealed it's also going to be doing lithium sulfur, and it's buying 450 lithium sulfur and silicon anode patents from the bones of Oxus Energy. Isn't that right, Jeff?
Oh yeah, they are in there grave digging and snatching away at every ounce. I mean, I think the thing you have there for Gelion is that they're an energy storage company that has had a stock price start at 80, and it has since then made a linear line straight down to like, I forget what it is now, like $6. And if you look at the news announcement for when they bought the Oxus patents from Johnson Matthey, it bumped up like 5%. But like, as somebody who works in the field, I'm going to tell you right now, it's, you really have to be committed to this technology to make it work well and make it work at the right scale. So good luck to them. And then, as far as LG, that's, scary, but great for the chemistry all around, so we'll see what they end up doing there. I think really what they're looking at is the manufacturing challenges of solid state, and then looking at other technologies that will maybe not have some of the same challenges and also won't have to rely on a NMC or a metal oxide cathode, which is one thing a lot of people forget about, like silicon and lithium metal and solid state is a lot of the times they're also using something that's already really expensive. So you have something expensive paired with something really expensive.
And just quick correction on Jeff, it looks like Gelion stock was at 100 and it's dropped down to 38.
Oh, wow.
Same point.
Just down. Sorry about that, Gelion. No harm. Good luck. All right, and moving off tier ones and OEMs, a little bit over to Europe and the other side of the pond, and their, I want to say, fight to stay relevant in the energy storage space, at least locally. So a lot of the gigafactories that were planned in Europe are now at risk. And in response, the EU is loosening subsidiary requirements to hopefully incentivize people to continue those gigafactory projects. A great example of this is Volkswagen has put their European plants on hold and are actively working in North America because the IRA has come out and there's, it's a lot of money and they want a piece of that. Interestingly, though, in all of this hardship and what I would say is pondering and waiting to see what happens so they can maximize the amount of free monies they get. You do have Factorial, which is a solid state company, going to Germany. I think that's most likely because Mercedes was one of their investors and they probably want to establish an office over there so that they can work closely with Mercedes as they try and most likely, hopefully succeed in getting their technology to market, but that's going to be a long play, so they need time, they need to be in the good graces of people with money. And then the other one that is really interesting here is Northvolt looking to get over $5 billion in financing. Not to like jinx anyone here, but this kind of feels like British Volt 2.0. Like we said, guys, like building up a gigafactory, you're running through tons of scrap, tons, and then on top of that, you then have to prove out. So like, let's just take a real world scenario here, which is like, let's say you get your lineup, you've made a cell, you start manufacturing it, and you're like, this is the cell I'm going to manufacture. It goes 1,000 cycles, everything looks good. Then you start manufacturing it and you don't make anything that works. So you go through like months of scrap until you get something usable. Now that you've got something usable, you start running it. And now you have to wait for it to go 1,000 cycles. And while you're waiting for it to go 1,000 cycles, you're increasing your yield weights and everything else. And then it's now not gone 1,000 cycles. And you have to ask yourself, where in the line is the problem for why this did not go the anticipated 1,000 cycles? And then you got to circle back and then change everything and then redo everything and all the testing. So it's a giant headache. Another thing that's also killing them is the premise of Northvolt was we are in a place with lots of cheap electricity, which will make our battery prices cheaper. And unfortunately, the Russian-Ukraine war broke out. And now energy is not cheap, which completely negates their whole selling point. On top of that, also they're an unknown quantity from a chemistry point of view. So am I going to buy from CATL or am I going to buy from Northvolt even if Northvolt's offering me a discount? Well, considering things are catching fire as of late, that looks really bad, so I have to go with the least risky option to not get a ton of bad press. Chevy Bolt, for example. I mean, that's just the reality. All right, moving on to startups. We're going to get out there, and we got two today we've covered previously in the past. So I'll be taking on one, or our Next Energy. So it looks like they've pivoted a little bit. It kind of makes sense, right? Their whole technology was around making packs. Originally it was marketed to be great for EVs, but I think one of the things they might be realizing is most of the automotive manufacturers don't want to build their car around someone else's pack design. They want to build their car around their own inherent pack design, which lets them build multiple models of different sizes and scales based on the pack they developed internally. Having done that, it looks like one is going towards the grid. Now this makes a lot of sense because it allows them to buy cells and integrate into packs and be a pack integrator and do it at scale. So good for them. Also, just for a bit of knowledge for everyone, they made a Tesla go twice its range. My guess is the way they achieved that is they took all the safety devices out of the pack and shoved as many cells as they humanly could into it, which, like, reasonably for a automotive manufacturer would not be anything from the get-go. Chevy Bolt fires, re-referencing that, because that's a great example of why you have to have propagation resistance and safety built into the pack. Whereas, when you start doing grid, if you at least insulate the units between each other, you got lots of space and lives aren't really going to be at risk with grid. So I think this makes a lot of sense for them, especially with how they're designing their packs to go towards grid. And then they're also going to be supplying LFP, which I think is just honestly the flavor of the month. We'll see how quickly people get on the sodium ion train if CATL starts cranking that out in mass.
Yeah, and while it's not necessarily been published in the news, sort of the word in the street right now too is that they're developing their own lithium metal batteries, and so that's also kind of going to give them their own sort of like Aubert did for Northvolt, their own kind of edge and their own maybe technology if it works. And so just kind of pivoting from being kind of their original plan to bigger, wider scale and some different chemistries.
And remember, guys, for grid storage, it's dollars per kilowatt hour per cycle. Because if it is cheaper for the person or the energy storage utility to hire somebody to go out and change the battery, that gets factored into the cost.
Yeah. So next up, Amprius. I'm sure, like us, you have just been blown away by the enormous amount of different publicity, posting, advertising, and news about Amprius in the last month and a half. One thing they announced their site selection for their gigawatt hour scale factory, which is going to be in Colorado. I actually got to hear Kang talking about that and all the permitting problems they were having for both this factory and the ones they had for their Fremont location as well when he spoke at the Slack Stanford Battery Center launch event about 2 weeks ago. So we hope that all goes well for them. We wish them the best. However, there's been a lot of publicity in the last month, and I'm really hoping that, honestly, that this is not just a ploy to kind of pump the stock right before we hit the 6-month mark after their SPAC IPO, which is typically when people are restricted in being able to sell and then suddenly able to sell their shares when they're insiders. So we'll see. I'm personally going to be watching all their stock disclosures each sort of month, quarter, and see who's selling and who's not. I hope I'm wrong, but I fully expect it to look like QuantumScape, where basically everyone sells every share they get every month, even as the stock drops. So again, hope I'm wrong on this, but we'll see. And you guys have this video as evidence of where my prediction lies.
All right. And as last as usual, recycling. The thing that always comes last in the equation when we all realize the things we've created somehow aren't sustainable, and therefore we need to now figure out how to recycle them to get the things and the very expensive things we put that in them back out.
Except with lithium, because that doesn't work.
Basically, guys, there's a lot of news here, but it's very superfluous. It's essentially a lot of companies establishing themselves to have plants in certain geographical locations, redwood materials in Nevada, Goshen and Edison Power partnering up to do recycling in Japan. Basically, you can imagine every country is going to have 3 or 4 of these Ascend elements in the UK that are going to act as the main hubs for recycling. One thing to keep in mind with recycling technologies, guys, is a 21700 from the battery store is $9. So these recycling companies need to figure out how to not only pay the shipping costs of getting all the batteries from A to B, such that they can start their recycling,
and the insurance on the shipping.
And the insurance, right? Things going, look, spent batteries still go boom. Then, once it finally arrives and they've paid all that money, to then have their manufacturing processes at such scale that it is cheaper than that, because nobody's going to want to buy a more expensive battery just because it's recycled. Now, there is a world where like the whole market shifts up and stuff, but it's a hard problem. And also, they still haven't figured out how to get the lithium out in recycling. They're good at getting all the metals out, but lithium is still a big problem.
Yeah, and high level, you get like sort of $1,000 for every $10,000 of battery pack in terms of recovered materials. Typically, that's nickel, cobalt, and copper. And so, first of all, if you're not an NMC cell, there's not much to recycle. I just don't even, honestly, I don't see people even trying to recycle LFP. It just doesn't make financial sense. You'd have to have an enormous amount of subsidies and penalties for people to be able to do that. But yeah, we're going to see. It is a really big issue, enormous amount of work going into it. And little teaser for our next video. Some of you might already know, but the next video Jeff and I are going to be doing is a Lithium Metal 101, which is going to be lithium metal mining, refining, and recycling. Sort of how, when, where, and why.
Yeah, we'll go through the steps A, B, C, and D of how this is all made, and we'll also give you guys a nice little timeline of like, if you were to start today and be like, this is my site selection, what is the realistic timeline till you even get a product? This unfortunately may dampen some of these 2030 CAGRs that are out there, but we'll find out. So see you all next time. As usual, please like, comment, subscribe.